Disclaimer. The following is a fan-made production. Lorekeeper Studios does not claim to own any of the characters, locations, or scenarios found within the Hyrule Warriors game or the Legend of Zelda series. All such rights are reserved by their respective owners. This production is made out of a love for the stories that have already been told, and we encourage you to support the original products. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
The Angel of Destiny, Episode 1, Psychostorm. Chapter 9, Nowhere Left to Run. The following is a continuation of the account residing in Tycalra's journal.
This was it. With Sia's forces no longer in our way, the only thing we had left to do was to close the Gate of Souls in the Valley of Seers. If we could do that, then I and all of my friends would finally be able to go home. Once the celebration of our previous victory had subsided, we immediately began to make our way to the Valley of Seers. Luckily for us, our destination wasn't incredibly far from our current position, not to mention that at this point, there was nothing that could slow us down on the way. Nearly all of Sia's troops had fallen at the Temple of Souls, so we rarely faced combat opposition, and we were too determined to be delayed by even the roughest of terrain. After only a few days of traveling, we had arrived. Not expecting to encounter any major obstacles this close to our ultimate goal, we recklessly hurried into the valley. Much to our surprise, however, it seemed as though Sia had set up one last-ditch effort to stop us from reaching the gate. The area was teeming with monsters, so much so that we had no choice but to draw our weapons and fight. Without hesitation, every single soldier in our army launched themselves at the approaching forces, defeating wave after wave of monsters. The battle hadn't gone on for very long when I observed that the creatures we were fighting seemed to be weaker than anything we had seen previously. Even after Link and I had obtained our legendary weapons, the monsters we faced then put up more of a fight than this. Stranger still, however, was the fact that no matter how many enemies we tore through, there always seemed to be more. Up to this point, I had always been able to see a clear end to our oppressors. Not even the incredible might of the army at the Temple of Souls seemed without its limits. But here, the enemies just kept coming and coming. I mentioned this to my comrades and learned that I was not the only one who had made such an observation. Something was wrong, and the other generals and I agreed that we would need to face the source of the monsters and shut it down before we would be able to close the Gate of Souls. Leaving the rest of our forces to take care of the weaker enemies, we instead focused our efforts on plowing a path through our opponents in order to allow us to slip further into the valley. We quickly reached the base of a large ruined temple and noticed that the monsters appeared to be coming from the top of the ruins where the Gate of Souls rested. Since most of the monsters seemed to be approaching from the central exit of the ruins, we collectively agreed that we would try to take one of the side routes in order to avoid the most oncoming opposition. However, when we reached the west entrance, a mysterious wall of flames appeared in front of us, completely blocking our path. Undaunted, we turned around and headed to the east entrance, only to find that the bridge leading to it had also been engulfed in flames. Feeling slightly discouraged, we made our way back to the main entrance, each of us silently praying that our path wouldn't be blocked. When we reached the base of the ruins, I looked up to see a devastating sight. The Dragon Knight, the same one who had killed me just weeks ago, stood at the top of the large staircase, looking down on us. The rest of my party hesitated for a moment, but I knew his tricks. Without a moment to lose, I bolted up the staircase ahead of the rest of the group in order to take him down before he could cause any trouble. As I approached him, however, I noticed something different about him. He didn't have his weapon ready. He didn't appear to be in a battle-ready position, and instead of the ferocity I saw in him before, his face was somewhat expressionless. From what I could tell, it didn't seem like he wanted to fight me at all, and it wasn't long until I was proven right. Mere moments before I reached him, he sprouted the same scaly wings I had seen him use before, as he leapt high into the air and positioned himself behind me. Although, instead of attacking me, he cast a large stream of flames onto the ground behind me, separating me from my allies. I ran back to the now impassable wall of fire, trying to find a way to extinguish the flame and allow my companions entry, but nothing any of us did seemed to have any visible impact.
Tycalra, you're going to have to go on without us.
No, we'll find another way to get you in.
There's no time. If we don't find the source of these monsters soon, it doesn't matter how weak they are. There's no way we're going to win.
But what if I fail? I couldn't stop Sia the first time. What makes you think I'll be able to do it now?
You won't fail, because this time you have your friends behind you. Even if we can't be there in person to help you fight, we will continue to lend you our strength and support. You can do this, Tycalra. We believe in you.
Thank you. With nothing left to gain from just waiting around, I turned back around and began making my way towards the top of the ruins. As I approached, the Dragon Knight landed in front of me with a stern expression on his face. I held out my blades in a defensive position, expecting the worst, but he simply nodded and stepped out of the way. Somewhat unsure as to why the enemy would simply let me pass, I reluctantly made my way up the steps. When I reached the summit, I stopped for a moment in front of him and muttered a hushed, "Thank you," and continued my push into the ruins. I have since thought long and hard as to why the knight would simply let me pass. We were on opposite sides of a heated battle, and he just let me go. It didn't seem to make any sense. Although, now that I'm really thinking about it, perhaps he let me go because I let him go. Despite his fierce fighting style, he was clearly a man driven by honor. And since I let him live after I defeated him at the Angel's Palace, he must have felt honor-bound to let me live at least once. I guess this was his way of repaying the debt that he owed me. Brushing the bizarre interaction with the Dragon Knight aside, I dashed up the ruins with near blinding speed, dodging enemies and obstacles as I went. The only thing that could even briefly slow me down was a massive barricade that had been put in place. But even this was no match for me. By using the combined power of my new wings and my unusual density, I was easily able to vault over the makeshift wall and continue my assault. After not even 5 minutes of climbing, I could see my destination. In a large room at the peak of the temple stood the Gate of Souls, and facing it, the sorceress who had tried to kill me and my friends. My immediate reaction was to simply run in, guns blazing, but we all know how well that worked out for me last time. So instead, I took it slow and stopped just short of the entryway to the room in order to form a more cohesive plan of attack. From what I could tell, Sia was the reason her army seemed to have no end, as every few seconds I would see about a dozen or so dark balls of energy emerge from her body and materialize into more and more monsters. I also noticed that she seemed to grow weaker and weaker with every summon. It was then that it dawned on me. Sia was using her own life force to reinforce her armies. I had to stop her, not just to put an end to the continuous waves of monsters that she summoned, but to save her from herself. I had already observed that she was now much weaker than she had been, so it was very likely that I could easily hold my own against anything she could throw at me. Not to mention, if I could somehow distract her, then I could potentially stop her from continuing her summoning spell. For once, it actually seemed like rushing in head first was the best idea. With nothing left in my way, I took a deep breath and stepped out from my hiding place and entered the room. "Sia!" Startled, the witch turned around to face me. She looked exhausted, almost as if she were ready to collapse at any moment. It was at this moment that I figured out how I would defeat her. I didn't need to beat her in combat in order to win. I just needed to wear her out to a point that she couldn't fight back. After that, I would just have to close the Gate of Souls and let Lana take care of Sia in whatever way she deemed necessary.
How did you get in here? You were supposed to die back at the Temple of Souls.
Yeah, I've been meaning to thank you for that. These wings have proven to be incredibly useful. Clearly frustrated by my taunts, Sia rushed towards me, swinging her scepter as if to beat me with it like a club. Without a moment's hesitation, I pushed my wings downward, launching me over her head and causing me to land gently on the ground behind her. "Careful with that, you almost hit me!" Again, Sia blindly rushed my location, swinging her scepter furiously in a way it clearly wasn't meant to be used. It looked like my plan was working. Not only had Sia completely stopped summoning monsters, but she got increasingly more exhausted by every single attack she threw at me, magical or otherwise. What's more is that she was in such a blind rage, she wasn't incredibly focused on trivial things like aiming, making each of her advances incredibly simple to avoid. I would write more about the battle, but there isn't really a whole lot to say. She would attack, I would dodge, I would make some taunting comment in order to provoke another attack, and she would attack again. This cycle continued on for a few minutes, until eventually Sia collapsed completely from exhaustion. I never even had to draw my swords. With nothing standing in my way, I looked up at the Gate of Souls. All that was left now was to close this gate, and my friends and I could all go home. Lana had told me that in order to successfully close the gate, I would need to overload it with powerful magic. At first, I wasn't sure what kind of magic I would use, until I realized that I had 2 incredibly powerful magical relics in my possession. So I drew the Blades of Destiny from off my back, leapt into the air, and cleaved the Gate of Souls in half, causing it to shatter into what must have been 100 pieces. My goal had been achieved. The Gate of Souls was closed. I ventured back down the ruins to meet my friends, who eagerly awaited my return. However, our reunion was somewhat bittersweet. While it was true we had been victorious and the war was finally over, this meant that it was finally time for us to part ways. I had grown incredibly close to these people. They had helped me to find a place that I felt like I truly belonged. But the fact of the matter was, I didn't really belong in Hyrule. I wasn't from this world, and there were other things that I would need to do elsewhere. We headed back to regroup with my friends at the school, laughing and crying every step of the way. Crenea also assured me that this was only the beginning of our relationship together, and that she would continue to train me so that when she called on me next, I would be ready. After we finally arrived at the school, we all took a moment, giving out a host of heartfelt goodbyes. But before long, it was finally time for Lana to send everyone back to where they came from. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, as Lana began to recite a spell. Moments later, I heard the chatter of dozens of voices all around me, immediately followed by a host of cheers. I opened my eyes to learn that we had returned right back to where we had been when we first were taken to Hyrule. Immediately, I picked up my backpack that was now resting on the ground next to me and began searching for my journal. And I guess that's where we are now. Here I am, sitting on a bench, writing this account in this very journal, trying to figure out whether it was fate or choice that brought me to Hyrule. In the end, I think it was a mix of both. Lana said that the Gates of Souls opened in eras of Hyrule's past because they each contained a piece of something important. According to her, the Gate of Souls shouldn't have even touched my world. But fate decided that it was important that I was there, so I ended up getting caught in the mix. At the same time, what I did in Hyrule was all up to me. It was my choice to lead the Hylian army. I made the conscious decision to pull the Blades of Destiny from the pedestal. And in the end, I chose to fight in that war. I said at the beginning of this account that I didn't believe in fate. But now that I am where I am, now that I've seen what I've seen, I think that fate does exist. Fate is that little force that pushes us to certain places, causes us to meet certain people, and maybe even manipulates cosmic forces in order to ensure certain outcomes. But it's what we choose to do with the situations presented to us that truly governs the universe. No cosmic force is going to tell me who to be. I have chosen my path. I am Tycalra, angel to the goddess Crenea, and I will choose my own destiny.
Epilogue. The following is an excerpt of a recorded interview between Tycalra and myself. The rest of the interview will be included later in this case file, but this particular part of the interview pertains directly to the events described in Tycalra's journal. Well then, that was a very peculiar story.
You don't believe me, do you?
You have to admit that the whole thing is a little far-fetched. Angels, gods, other worlds, those kind of things do typically fall under the fantasy category.
What, and just because it's a little unbelievable, it can't possibly be true?
I think this whole thing is a bit more than a little unbelievable. You hand me a notebook that contains a fantastical story about magic and monsters and tell me it's fact. How am I supposed to believe something like that?
Cornea was right. This whole thing is just too much for the normal human to understand. I don't even know why I bothered with you.
Mr. Anmores, I want to believe you. I really do. But I'm going to need an explanation that makes at least a little more sense.
Sense? You want sense? An entire school disappeared off the face of the planet for 6 months, and you expect things to make sense?
Wait, what did you say?
You should know what happened. Do you really need me to repeat it?
No. How long did you say you were gone?
6 months. We left in October.
Well, now I know you aren't telling me the truth.
What the heck is that supposed to mean? We left in October, were in Hyrule for 6 months, and came back...
Mr. Anmores, that simply isn't possible. Everyone knows that North Creek High School has been missing for years.
What?
Do you really not know?
No what?
Your school wasn't gone for 6 months. It was gone for 3.5 years.